Grade 12 Economics. Good afternoon. I'm Mr. Mhlongo, and I'm back here with you today, pushing Economics, Term 3 to Term 4. Remember that this lesson is brought to you by Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Cyber Discovery. Today we are shifting our focus from our previous lessons that we did before. We wrote your paper 2. Our focus area now, we are completing paper 1, which is economic pursuit. On paper 1, the focus area is in economic growth and development. This topic is a part of your paper 1. Will contribute 15 marks in question 1. Together with the rest of economic pursuit, will also contribute in section B, question 3, will be a part of question 3, will be a part of question 4 as half of 40, and then will be a part of question number 6, together with other economic pursuit questions. So please join me. Let's see what we have in the pocket for you this side. The following are the lesson objectives that will be achieved during the course of this lesson. So at the end of this lesson, you as a candidate will be able to differentiate between economic growth and development. You will be able to briefly discuss measures of economic growth and measures of economic development. The lesson will also equip you to be able to discuss in detail demand-side approach to economic growth and development. You will be able to briefly discuss supply-side approach to stimulate economic growth and economic development. So we have splitted the topic because it's longer with about 2 essays. So we have splitted the topic into 2. There will be the short part for today and the short part for next week so that we can be efficient. It is believed that you already know the following concept on economic growth and development. We have economic growth concept that was covered in grade 10 and grade 11, challenges of economic growth, and then economic development concept. Also economic development measures. How do we measure economic development? Our lesson is as follows. We have economic growth and development as the main topic. So we'll be discussing economic growth in brief, whereby you will be able to discover the definition, the measures, and the importance of economic growth in the economy. Then we'll also discuss demand-side approach to economic growth and development as an essay. And then we will briefly discuss economic development. That's when we will be indicating measures of economic development. And then also we also discuss in brief the importance of economic development. We'll also briefly discuss supply-side approach. Remember, if we say we'll briefly discuss, that means that topic doesn't worth about an essay. It worth the maximum of 10 marks and minimum of 1. But if I say we discuss in detail, that means the topic is an essay topic. So the following are the concepts that are important for you to understand the lesson. Economic growth is the increase in productive capacity of goods and services. Economic development is the improvement of social welfare or social well-being or the living standard for the country's citizens. Real GDP is the gross domestic product that has been adjusted for inflation. Remember, if we talk about real GDP, we mean GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation or where inflation effect has been removed. Nominal GDP is a gross domestic product or GDP that has not been adjusted for inflation, so it has an inflation effect. Life expectancy is the average number of years a person is expected to live from birth to death. GDP per capita or income per capita is the total receivable income by each citizen when real GDP is divided by the working population. We continue with the terminology. Land restitution. So we call this one the economic redress policy focused on compensating those who lost their land forcefully through oppressive policies. Then we have a land redistribution. Is the economic redress policy focused on giving back land for residential purposes and productive use. Those people that receive that land are the ones that lost it forcefully during the apartheid or oppressive laws. Progressive tax system is the tax system that is used when low-income earners are taxed less than high-income earners. Wealth tax. Wealth taxes are taxes imposed imposed on the sale of assets. Whenever we're selling an asset, we pay what we call the wealth tax. Cash benefits are transfers made by the government to social members to ensure social security welfare, like social transfers, which include social grant. Benefits in kind, or benefits in natura, if you like, are free benefits extended by the state to citizens to improve their welfare. Those are benefits in kind or benefits in natura. Property subsidies. These are subsidies on the purchase of houses given by the state to encourage individual ownership. So the government provides this subsidy to encourage people to own houses or shelter. Demand side approach involves discretionary changes in monetary and fiscal policies with the aim of changing the levels of aggregate demand. Supply side approach refers to the measures used to impact changes in the aggregate supply of goods and services produced in the economy. Employment Equity Act is the redress policy which prohibits discriminatory actions in the workplace based on gender, race, disability, etc. Continue. Broad-based Black economic empowerment is the economic redress policy introduced to promote participation of former marginalized people in economic mainstream and procurement. The regulation is the removal of unnecessary laws and regulations as well as restrictions to improve economic efficiency. Privatization, the transfer of ownership from public sector to the private sector. The capital formation is the increase in capital stock in the economy. Human resources refers to all mental and physical effort exerted and is traded on the labor market for wages and salaries. Now, the concept of economic growth. So economic growth, we said, is the increase in productive capacity of production of goods and services in the country over a period of time. It is the increase in productive capacity measures quarterly. So we measure economic growth per quarter. Remember, the quarter take the period of 3 months. If economic activity increase, economic growth is likely to increase. That's why we say in definition, economic growth is the increase in economic activities. The increase in investment, employment, aggregate demand on goods and services, new industrial establishment, and the production of goods and services stimulates economic growth. How do we measure economic growth? It is necessary for the nation to measure economic growth to determine the welfare of economic activities. Remember, economic growth is very much embedded on economic activities. If ever there's more economic growth or high economic growth, that means that there's high level of economic activities. But should there be lower economic growth, that means there are lower economic activities. Nominal GDP is converted to real GDP to remove inflation effect when measuring economic growth. So remember, when we talk of nominal GDP, we mean the one that has not been adjusted. So we adjust and convert nominal GDP to real GDP so that we can measure economic growth. Nominal GDP is the GDP at current prices, GDP figures which contain an inflation effect. So we don't use nominal GDP to measure economic growth because it gives us distorted figures of economic growth. It gives us inflated figures in a way that we might think there is economic growth while there is more inflation. Economic growth is measured through real GDP. Real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation or inflation effect on them has been removed. Calculating economic growth, we simply say economic growth equal to nominal GDP minus real GDP over real GDP multiplied by 100. Then we get our economic growth. So the question is, why is economic growth important? So it is important because it might lead to economic development. If we have economic growth, it's highly possible that we can have economic development, because remember, with economic growth means there are more economic activities. So those activities generate more income, and that income can also be calculated to convert what we call economic growth. So economic growth is important because it can lead to economic development. And as we have economic growth, there can be more job creation, which can allow people to afford because they'll be earning income. When more goods and services are produced, the demand for labor increases, which stimulates job creation. So it is important for you to understand that economic growth is accompanied by the increase in employment opportunities. So whenever there is more demand for goods and services, firms will be attracted to employ more workers to produce even more goods and services. Economic growth results in increase in spending capacity, which stimulate the multiplier effect. Whenever there's more economic growth or high economic growth, people will tend to have more income and spend more on goods and services. That will be increasing what we call the multiplier effect. So the money will be increasing in the economy. Economic growth creates a good environment for investment. Investors are easily attracted by good economic climate. If ever in the economy we have better economic activities, investors can be attracted to invest in the country because that can yield more returns for them. We continue with the importance. With economic growth, tax revenues will be increasing, caused by high employment, high spending, and more profit by businesses. We know if we have economic growth, there will be high level of tax revenues received by the state because that will mean there's more income available in the country. This improves the provision of public goods and services in the economy. So if ever tax revenue increases, that simply tells you that the government will be having more tax revenues. Economic growth has a great effect on social stability because employment and poverty reduction result in social welfare. So if ever there's economic growth, there will be peace in the society. There won't be social instability. There will be social stability because people will be employed, they will be earning income. So for that reason, there will be less people that are dependent on the government for the provision of some public goods and services. For economic growth to create enough employment opportunities, it must increase faster than the population growth rate. So it is important that you know this. For us to say we have more economic growth, we need to ensure that our population growth rate doesn't increase faster than economic activities. So for economic growth to occur, it must increase more than what we call population growth rate. Then the economic growth can be able to cover all needs of the society in that case. Then we continue. Economic growth focus. Why is it important to improve economic growth? So improving GDP of the country, the gross domestic product measures the total number of all final goods and services produced within the country over a certain period. GDP is regarded as economic barometer that measures economic growth. So if ever GDP increases, economic growth might also increase. To assess economic growth, inflation must be removed from nominal GDP, converting it to real GDP. Why should we remove inflation? Inflation must be removed so that we don't discover distorted figures of economic growth. We will assume that there is more economic growth while there is no economic growth. Instead, there is high level of inflation. Economic growth is more accurate when it is measured through real GDP. So we prefer using real GDP over nominal GDP to measure economic growth. Then we move to economic development. So economic development refers to the improvement of wellness or living standard of the people. Whenever living standard for the people is increasing, we call that economic development. Economic development is regarded as a well-being or welfare of country's citizens. Should people live under better conditions, having proper housing, proper electricity, water supply, electricity, that simply means we have economic development. If ever basic facilities are made available in the community that improve or uplift people's living standard, then we can say we have high level of economic development. For effective social welfare to occur, the economic growth must create enough employment opportunities for citizens. So there must be more economic activities available for citizens. Then we can say welfare of the people has been increased. The government has a major impact on securing people's economic development. That is achieved through efficient provision of basic service needs such as housing, water, and electricity, social infrastructure, and economic infrastructure. Remember, if we talk about social infrastructure, we mean the infrastructure that serves the society as a whole. And if we talk about economic infrastructure, the one that serves the market, allow the market to function easily within the economy. How do we measure economic growth? So economic growth is measured through HDI. Economic development is measured through HDI, which is known as Human Development Index. The Human Development Index is an index used by United Nations to measure the level of development for each country. So the following are three aspects that are used to measure economic development. Check the first one, life expectancy. Remember, life expectancy we said refer to the average number of years a person can live from birth to death. So we know that if ever life expectancy is very low, that simply means there's a lower level of economic development in the country. If life expectancy is very high, there might be a better economic development. Education or literacy rate, the expected and average years of schooling concerned with adults who can read and write. Real income per capita. The total income receivable by each country's citizen, if income was distributed equally, we call that one income per capita. Standard of living is the welfare of the nation or social welfare. Economic development focus. Okay, let's check. So basic needs for all country citizens. So for us to be able to see if there's economic development, there must be the provision of basic needs for all citizens of the country, improving human resource development through educational opportunities, skills, and training, as well as access to basic health care. If the state can intervene by improving human resource development through skills, that can lead to better economic development. Improving citizen freedom, economic and social freedom, allowing them freedom of choice through variety of opportunities, can also be seen as the improvement of economic development. Making social and economic infrastructure available to everyone. That's when the state intervened by providing economic infrastructure such as economic hubs, etc. Social infrastructure is when the government ensure that in the society there's a proper infrastructure such as shopping centers, etc. Then we continue. So the demand side. Remember, you must be able to draw the line between economic growth and economic development. What is meant by economic growth? The improvement of economic activities. What is meant by economic development? The improvement of living standard. How do we measure economic growth? Economic growth is measured through real GDP. How do we measure economic development? It is measured through life expectancy, standard of living, education level, and income per capita. Now we're moving to the demand side approach to stimulate economic growth and development. Here we're answering the question on what can the government do to improve aggregate demand in the economy so that the economic growth and development can be achieved. We deal with the demand side approach. The demand side approach involves discretionary changes in the monetary policy and fiscal policies with the aim of changing the level of aggregate demand. So that means the state, for it to invest on this one or improve demand side, it must ensure that it uses expansionary fiscal policy and expansionary monetary policy so that there will be we'll be able to achieve increase in demand. It focuses on all measures that can stimulate the total demand in the economy. So we check all aspects that can be used to stimulate the demand for goods and services in the economy. It is an approach that focuses on aggregate demand created by household, businesses, and the government. When the aggregate demand increases, it stimulates businesses to increase output, which in turn can increase employment and improve living standard. Whenever there's more demand, firms are encouraged to produce more goods and services. People will be employed because firms will be demanding more labor force. Okay, according to an international benchmark practice, developing countries should run their economies in such a way that they create economic growth. So the proceeds of the growth should be used to create social transformation, human capital formation, and redistribution of income. So we need to distribute income fairly. The well-accelerated aggregate demand is an incentive to businesses to produce more to meet the demand. A crowding out effect. If ever the demand has improved, that attracts firms to employ more workers and firms to produce more goods and services. So it has a huge impact on the availability of job opportunities. So it is therefore important to keep the demand high within the economy since it determines the supply of goods and services that are required. But however, it is important that you note the fact that as the demand increases more than the supply, there might be inflation. So as much as the demand is high, the supply must also be high so that it won't be able to trigger on the inflation. The monetary policy approach. So to ensure economic growth and development, the Reserve Bank, South African Reserve Bank, uses monetary policy approach with the aim of increasing money supply. How does it work? The Reserve Bank intervenes by decreasing repo rate, decreasing cash reserves, and then buying bonds from the open market, and also relaxing moral persuasion, allowing people to get more credit and demand more goods and services. The monetary policy approach consists of decisions by central bank as a part of monetary authorities to influence the interest rate and money supply in the economy by implementing inflation targets set by the government. So what happens? The government have set inflation targeting and then the Reserve Bank must implement to ensure that inflation does not go above the maximum limit, which is 6%. Central bank manages the availability of money by means of open market transaction and cash reserve requirement. So the central bank ensures that it manages the availability of money. If there's more money, it collects money from the circulation by increasing repo rate so that there will be less credit available in the economy. By also increasing cash reserve to increase the vault cash or vault money. Monetary policy approach continue. Manage the cost of money by means of interest rates. So the South African Reserve Bank is using interest rate to manage the flow or availability of money in the economy. Variations in the levels of interest rate increase or decrease the cost of credit and determine the quantity of money through the workings of the money supply. So variations of exchange rate for the purpose of changing the terms of trade are used as an auxiliary method to bring about the change in the stock of money. Then we continue controlling repo rate. Remember, repo rate refers to the interest rate charged by Reserve Bank to commercial banks on their borrowings. So to affect the interest rate that commercial banks can offer for two purposes: influence credit creation by making credit more expensive or cheaper, and then stabilize exchange rate by encouraging capital flows and outflows in order to take care of deficit or surplus on the current account of the POP. Interest rates are directed by changes in repo rate. Whenever repo rate changes, interest rate will also be changing. We continue. Conducting open market transaction. That selling or buying bonds in the open market. Should there be what we call lower economic growth, the Reserve Bank must do what? Must buy bonds from the open market so that it gives money back to commercial sector. Then there will be improvement of economic activities. To restrict the bank credit, South African Reserve Bank sells securities, and when the bank when the banks buy these securities, money flows back to the system. Flows back to South African Reserve Bank. So remember, whenever Reserve Bank is selling, it collects money. The money goes to Reserve Bank. But whenever banks are selling, they collect money from South African Reserve Bank. The banks then have less money to lend and cannot extend as much credit as possible like before. To encourage credit creation, the SARB, South African Reserve Bank, buys securities in the open market. Money then flows into banking system. So to ensure that there's more credit, the Reserve Bank will be buying bonds from open market, then money will be going back to the society. Banks use cash or create credit. Prices, this process is referred to as quantitative easing. Whenever we increase money supply, we call that quantitative easing because the Reserve Bank allows more money to be available in circulation. Moral suasion or moral persuasion. So South African Reserve Bank consult with banks to persuade them to act in a manner that is highly desirable based on economic conditions. If ever the economy is faced by lower economic growth and high inflation, then Reserve Bank can intervene by persuading commercial banks to behave in a manner that is acceptable based on the current economic conditions. The persuasion is often linked to transaction by SRB in the money market, e.g., the buying and the selling of bills and bonds. If the banks are generous to extending credit, the Southern Reserve Bank can call them to be less lenient. However, simultaneously, it can sell paper in the market and drain excess liquidity so that banks can have less money. So the Reserve Bank normally happens to buy paper assets in the open market from commercial banks so that they remain with more money, or it sells to them. As the Reserve Bank sell to them paper market, Reserve Bank sell to them, it sells maybe paper assets. What is going to happen in there? Commercial banks will be remaining with less money available in circulation as they buy those paper assets or shares. Then for that reason, the money supply decrease in the economy. Credit creation results in consumer spending money they don't even have. We know that people are always tempted to spend. Should there be more credit creation, people will be taking loans and spending more money that they don't even have. That will be payable in future with more interest. Fiscal policy approach. So fiscal policy is driven by Department of Finance. We know that Department of Finance is fully responsible for fiscal policy in South Africa. It aims to facilitate government political and economic objectives. So It facilitates government objective, political objective, as well as economic objectives. That's the fiscal policy. Government can use fiscal policy to change taxes and government spending, which can stimulate or inhibit economic growth and development. If ever the government intervenes by increasing government spending, that means there will be more money available in the economy that can lead to more economic growth and development. But should the government decrease government spending, there will be less money available, less job creation, and less demand for goods and services. If the state intervenes by decreasing taxes, it encourages people to have more disposable income and demand more goods and services. But should the state intervene by increasing taxes, that simply means there will be less income or disposable income available in the economy. Fiscal policy focuses on budget deficits and surpluses to increase or decrease aggregate demand. It also uses the budget deficit and budget surplus. The general objective of demand management is to maintain aggregate demand so that it is not too low and also not too high. In this situation, we're talking about to ensure that the government achieve its objectives. It uses this fiscal policy to maintain aggregate demand. Remember, if ever the government increase spending, there will be more money available, more employment opportunities, and more demand. But should the state reduces its spending, some people will be losing their jobs. For that reason, then the economy will be maintained automatically. Fiscal policy continues. South Africa's national budget is the main tool to drive fiscal policy and implement the fiscal policy through the following: progressive personal income tax. Remember, this one occurs when a tax system that prevails when high income earners are taxed more than low income earners, and the money benefits the poor in the economy. High income group or income earners are taxed at higher rates, while low income earners are taxed at the less rate. So that simply means if you earn more, you are paying more tax, but if you earn less, you are paying less tax. These taxes are used to finance social development, and the poor benefit more than those with high income from social allowances. So the state intervened by providing these grants using the money from taxes. And then the wealth tax. In this case, we talk about the tax that is paid on the purchase or the sale of assets. Properties such as houses, offices, and factories in the urban areas are taxed annually. Transfer duties are paid when properties are being sold. Whenever you buy the property, after that you will have to pay what we call the transfer duty, meaning you are transferring the house from one person to yourself. Capital gains tax (CGT) is levied on gains and on the sale of capital goods such as property and shares. That's a capital gains tax. Shares and bonds are taxed when they are traded. Whenever we buy shares, they will be taxed. Whenever we buy bonds, will also be taxed. Taxes are used to finance expenditure that benefits the poor in the economy. We continue. Cash benefits. So here we refer to the money given by the government to the society without having to work for anything. Old age pensions are part of it. Disability grants, child support grant, and unemployment insurance are important cash benefits that we have in the country. These are also known as social security payments. So we call them social security payments or social security grants. Continue in kind. So the provision of healthcare. See, if we talk about the benefits in kind, we talk about the healthcare, education, school meals, protection, also including municipal service as well as infrastructure. These are the benefits in kind because they are made available free of charge to all of the social members. So they are benefits in natura or benefits in kind provided by the government. Where a user fee is charged, poor people and low-income earners benefit more than others because they either pay nothing or they pay less than high-income earners. So if we talk about benefits in natura, that's when now the government provides some goods free of charge to the society. Then people will pay nothing or some will be paying less where their user charges. And then limited quantity of free water and electricity are provided. So that's when the state intervenes now to provide the free water and electricity on a monthly basis to people that are deserving to get such in a monthly basis. This ensures the standard of living and marginalized citizens improve. So after doing such, people that have been marginalized or people that are pensioners will find themselves having the well-improved living standard. We continue with the fiscal policy, other redistribution. So some macroeconomic policies have advantages that favor the poor. So they push the poor first to benefit in the economy. Public work programs provide employment and strategic integrated projects. SIP programs provide employment subsidies and other cash benefits such as training, financing, and export incentives to small, micro, and medium enterprises. So these projects are given by the government to benefit small businesses in the economy. EPWP expanded public works program. So projects to improve skills and infrastructure in disadvantaged areas or communities where there is a high level of unemployment and poverty. So EPWP, I think you are familiar with them. So those people employed there, they improve existing infrastructure in the society. And has it results to the increase in job creation because also it's labor intensive. Also allow people to earn skills that can be used in the future when their contract have lapsed. Previous disadvantaged people are the preference. Under EPWP fisheries and people as they relatively less units, which becomes a problem for them to function because most of the income is spent by businesses to pay for electricity instead of producing goods and services. We know that the cost of fuel is relatively high in South Africa. Eskom is the monopoly, the electricity supplier in the country. In recent years, the rates escalated substantively, and at times it has been unable to meet the demand for electricity, and this undermines the efficiency in the economy. We know that the cost of electricity is crazy in South Africa, it's too much. For that reason, it becomes more of a challenge for businesses to cope and be able to produce more goods because we used to pay for the cost of energy, such as electricity. Government announced substantial investment in new electricity capacity. Government regulate petrol and paraffin prices in South Africa. Prices of imported crude oil are linked to high international market prices. High liquid energy prices undermine the efficiency in the economy. If ever petrol or fuel is too expensive, that simply make it difficult because it can even result to less demand for goods and services because people will be spending more money on buying fuel than less money for buying other goods and services. Factors of production. So as for human resources here, we're talking about labor. So what should be done? So labor must be trained enough so that it will be able to produce more goods and serve at the lower cost and being more efficient. So apply migration policies to retain highly skilled workers and curb the inflow of lesser skilled workers. Promote quality of education and training to increase labor productivity. Remember, if people are trained and if they are held, they become productive citizens. Reduce the power of unions in order to encourage greater flexibility in wage and labor practices. We continue. Natural resources. So value, grow and conserve the natural resources of a country. It is important to ensure that natural resources of the country are highly conserved. They are used in a manner that is sustainable so that they can last long. New discoveries of minerals and other nature to ensure that there is a huge investment in different places for minerals, so that there will be improvement on this of the supply on goods and services. Invest in research and technology to increase productivity of natural resources. So firms can use modern technology to produce more under what we call natural or primary sector. Capital formation. So promote private sector investment in man-made capital such as new factories. Then you continue by talking about the progressive tax system whereby high income earners are taxed more than low income earners and the money is used to benefit the poor in the economy. Number two, you continue check on the second one, which will be maybe property subsidies. That's when the state intervene by providing a certain amount of money to people that are earning less than a certain amount so that they can be able to afford to own the property. And then also we talk about wealth taxes, which are the taxes that are imposed on the purchase or the sale of assets. And then we talk about also the capital gains tax. When we sell those assets or shares, then we pay what we call capital gains tax. And then we go further to other methods like land reform policies. We talk about land redistribution, which occurs when the government gives back land to people that lost it forcefully during the apartheid. And then we talk about land restitution policies, which refer to the process whereby the government give compensation financially to people that lost their land forcefully during the apartheid. And then you have other distribution measures that are in place. Then you talk about the monetary policy, that when the state intervened by lowering repo rate to encourage people to borrow more money from financial institutions, then they can demand more goods and services. We talk about decreasing repo rate. What we call it, cash reserves. When the government intervened or Reserve Bank intervened by increasing cash reserves, there will be less money supply and less demand for goods and services. Should the state intervene by through open market transaction, the state can do what? Reserve Bank can do what? Can sell bonds into the open market. By selling bonds, that can lead to the people having, commercial banks having less money available in circulation to create credit, and then there will be less money. But if the government intervene by increasing, or by buying bonds from the open market, that will be increasing money supply. So under monetary policy, you can be restrictive or expansionary. If you are expansionary, you allow more economic growth and development. But if you are contractionary, you deprive economic growth and development. So it is important that you know that. So if you answer in this essay, it is important that you become more expansionary so that there will be improvement of economic growth and economic development. You lower taxes, you increase government spending. For that reason, there will be more money available in the circulation and more demand for goods and services. You lower repo rate, allow people to borrow more money from commercial banks because credit will be affordable. And then also Reserve Bank can also intervene by doing what? By lowering cash reserves so that there will be more money available in circulation and that is in vault cash. And then also Reserve Bank can buy bonds from the open market, allowing banks to have more availability of cash that can be used to give credits in the economy. Then the last one, Reserve Bank can also intervene by relaxing moral pressure, moral persuasion, which will allow commercial banks to allow more credit creation in the economy, because whenever there's more credit creation, people are always tempted to spend. They spend the money they don't even have. So that's how you can respond to the essay. So the lesson for the next week, we will be talking about firstly the North-South divide. On the North-South divide, the main focus is on the following. We focus on the developed and developing nations. What are we dealing with in there? The Northern Hemisphere consists of countries that are developed. So even though we have countries that are developing in the Southern Hemisphere, there are very few, that are developed in the Southern Hemisphere. But the Northern Hemisphere consists of developed nations, and then Southern Hemisphere is developing nations. What are we discussing in there? We are comparing those two in terms of divide to say, how is the life expectancy for both? For developed nations on the north, life expectancy is very high because people have access to proper medication and healthcare and people are employed. And then what about the Southern Hemisphere? It's very low because people are unemployed. There's lower level of income and lower living standards. Check again. What about economic growth? Under Northern Hemisphere, there's a high level of economic growth because those countries are having high productive capacity. But what about economic growth in Southern Hemisphere? It's very low because firms are very much in firms in those countries, so they don't have enough capacity to produce goods and services. And then also, level of education in Northern Hemisphere is very, very high because those countries have invested long ago in education. But in Southern Hemisphere, level of education is very weak. It's very much poor. It's not well advanced, does not create enough opportunities for people of those countries. And then technology is very much advanced in Northern Hemisphere, but in Southern Hemisphere, technology is very poor. They are always using outdated technology. They take time to adapt to the new technology because they believe it's expensive. And then we continue. We check environmental damage. What is the impact of Northern Hemisphere on the environment? The Northern Hemisphere has a huge negative impact on the environment because they burn fossil fuels as they produce goods and services. So during the production process, they use machines that are not eco-friendly. So as they use machines that are not environmental friendly, they burn fossil fuel. As they burn fossil fuel, what happens? There will be environmental pollution, which will then affect even developing nations or nations on the south. They will be affected through climate change as well as are burned, will lead to the crack of ozone layer and the damage of ecosystem. That will lead to the climate change as well as the global warming. So that's how northern countries or Northern Hemisphere affect the world or affect the Southern Hemisphere countries. And then we'll go further to talk about, still on the divide, we're talking about globalization challenges. So we have some challenges that are faced by developing nations in the globalization. So which are those challenges? Those challenges include the likes of, number one, the trade. The countries in the South, they cannot trade effectively in the globalization. Why? Because they have weak currencies. Their currencies are not as strong enough for them to be able to trade effectively with those other countries in the North. Their currencies are weak. They tend to pay more money when they want to afford the foreign currencies. So for that reason, they cannot trade easily in the globalization. It becomes more of a challenge. And then also, the growth is also a problem. Southern countries are unable to grow effectively under globalization. Why they cannot grow? They cannot grow because they are faced by infant industries. As they have infant industries, also at the same time, they have less to offer in the globalization. Those countries have less goods that they are producing, they have less capacity to produce, so they cannot grow effectively there. And also, they focus most on natural resources, so they invest most on what you call primary sector. As they invest more on primary sector, then they sell those goods that are having strategic value or as natural resources, unprocessed goods and services, which then result to them being unable to offer the most in the global market. They offer relatively less because they are unable to process their basically minerals into final goods and services. So it tends to be very much hard for them to grow effectively. The other thing is that they are manipulated in the globalization. So developed nations buy minerals at the lower cost from South Africa and sell them back as finished goods at the higher cost. That alone is a challenge for our nations because our minerals worth more, but as they go out being very cheap because they've not been processed, they have not been value added. But when they come back, they become relatively expensive. That's a challenge faced by what we call developing nations or Southern Hemisphere in the globalization. Another one is poverty. So poverty is one of the challenges we are having under globalization. What happens under poverty? So countries find it difficult to function properly. In there, we are referring to basically developing countries. They cannot curb or get rid of poverty because under globalization, these countries are having infant industries. There's high level of population. So they are overpopulated. There's high level of birth rate compared to developed nations. As they have high level of birth rate in these nations, what happens? Their firms are unable to do what? Are unable to create enough jobs for unemployed people. So for that reason, they find themselves trapped under poverty in developing nations or in Southern Hemisphere. So poverty become a challenge because of high level of unemployment. Also because of high level of population growth within those countries. And then we will be moving to, what is it? We will be talking about also the growth and development policies. So next week, the lesson will continue to growth and development policies. So those policies include the likes of the GIA, ASGISA, GIBSA, etc. So let's check. Growth and development policies. Development policies that will be discussed next week. So number one, we have RDP. Remember, RDP was formed in 1994 by a democratic government to ensure that